From the very beginning of your awareness, you were gently conditioned to accept a single, unquestioned assumption that the world exists independently of you, solid, fixed, and already determined. You were taught that life is something happening outside, something you must respond to, adapt to, and survive within. But what if this assumption, the very foundation upon which you've built your understanding of reality, is incomplete? What if what you call the world is not as external as it appears, but instead a reflection, an echo, a projection arising from within your own consciousness? Consider for a moment how a dream feels when you are inside it, how real the sensations seem, how convincing the people appear, how unquestionable the environment feels. And yet, when you awaken, you realize that everything you experienced was not outside of you at all. It was generated within your own awareness. The sights, the sounds, the emotions, all of it unfolded inside the mind, taking on the appearance of reality. Now ask yourself, what fundamentally separates that dream from what you are experiencing right now? Is it truly different, or is it simply more consistent, more stable, and therefore more convincing? The world you perceive through your senses feels undeniably real because you have learned to trust your senses as the ultimate authority. You see with your eyes, you hear with your ears, you touch and feel, and you conclude that what is perceived must be real in and of itself. But perception is not neutral. It is filtered, shaped, and interpreted through your consciousness. Two individuals can witness the same event, yet experience it in completely different ways, because what they see is not just the event itself, but their interpretation of it, colored by their beliefs, assumptions, and inner states. This alone suggests something profound, that reality is not a fixed object, but a fluid experience, shaped by the one who perceives it. If reality were truly independent and absolute, it would appear identical to all. Yet it does not. It bends, shifts, and transforms depending on the observer, revealing that the observer is not separate from the observed, but intimately connected to it. You may begin to notice that what you consistently expect tends to appear. What you deeply believe seems to find its way into your experience. Patterns repeat themselves, not randomly, but in alignment with something internal, something unseen, yet undeniably influential. This is not coincidence, nor is it chance. It is the subtle operation of consciousness, expressing itself outwardly. What you hold within, whether consciously or unconsciously, begins to take form in the world you perceive. The circumstances of your life, the people you encounter, the opportunities and limitations you experience, all begin to mirror your inner assumptions. And because this process is continuous, seamless, and largely unnoticed, it creates the illusion that the world is happening independently of you, when in truth, it is responding to you. There is a silent, almost invisible process taking place at every moment, a movement from within to without, from consciousness to form. Every thought, every feeling, every belief carries with it a certain quality, a certain state. And this state does not remain confined within you. It expresses itself, projecting outward into your experience. Just as a dream takes shape from the mind of the dreamer, so too does your waking reality take shape from your inner state of being. The difference is not in the mechanism, but in the level of awareness. In a dream, you are unaware that you are the creator, and so the dream feels like something happening to you. In waking life, the same principle operates, but with such consistency and continuity that it convinces you of its independence. Yet the deeper truth remains that what you see is not separate from what you are. As you begin to question the nature of reality, a subtle shift occurs within you. You start to loosen your attachment to appearances, recognizing that what seems solid may not be as fixed as it appears. You begin to see that circumstances are not final, that situations are not permanent, that what is visible is only a surface expression of something deeper. This realization does not immediately change your world, but it changes your relationship to it. Instead of feeling bound by what you see, you begin to sense that there is more, something behind the scenes, something within you that holds greater power than any external condition. And as this awareness grows, the rigid structure of reality begins to soften, revealing its true nature as something fluid, responsive, and intimately connected to your consciousness. There is a truth so simple, yet so easily overlooked, that once it is seen, it begins to quietly reshape everything you thought you understood about life. It is the realization that nothing exists for you unless you are aware of it. Every sight, every sound, every sensation, every experience you have ever known has appeared within your consciousness. You have never stepped outside of it, not even for a moment. Even the idea of an external world, something out there, is itself an experience arising within awareness. This means that what you call reality is not something you encounter, but something that is revealed through the medium of your own consciousness. Without awareness, there is no experience, no world, no life as you know it. And so, what you have taken to be secondary, your consciousness, is in fact primary, the very foundation upon which all experience is built. You may have been led to believe that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, something that emerges from physical processes, but look deeper. The brain itself, like every object you perceive, is known only through awareness. You see it, think about it, learn about it, all within consciousness. So how can something that appears within awareness be the source of awareness itself? This inversion reveals a profound insight, that consciousness is not produced by the body, but rather the body is perceived within consciousness. The same is true for the entire world you experience. Everything you call physical, everything you consider solid and real, is known to you only because you are conscious of it. Strip away consciousness, and nothing remains in your experience. This is not a theory. It is something you can observe directly, by simply noticing that every moment of your life unfolds within the field of awareness that you are. Within this awareness, there is a creative power, subtle yet absolute. It is not passive. It does not merely observe. It shapes, organizes, and gives meaning to everything you experience. Your thoughts are not separate from this process. They are movements within consciousness that influence its expression. Your feelings, your beliefs, your assumptions, all arise within awareness, and in doing so, they begin to define the quality of your experience. This is why two people can exist in seemingly similar circumstances, yet live in entirely different realities. One may perceive limitation, while another sees opportunity, not because the external world is different, but because their consciousness is different. The world they experience is filtered through their inner state, and so it appears to conform to what they are aware of being. If you begin to observe your own experience closely, you may notice a pattern, a correlation between your inner state and what unfolds around you. When you dwell in certain thoughts long enough, they begin to take on a sense of reality. When you persist in a particular feeling, it starts to shape your perception, influencing how you interpret events, how you respond to situations, and even what you notice or overlook. This is not accidental. It is the natural function of consciousness expressing itself. What you are aware of being, consciously or unconsciously, becomes the lens through which reality is experienced. And because this process is continuous, it creates the illusion that the world is determining your state, when in fact your state is determining the world you perceive. There is no separation between you and what you experience, only a difference in appearance. The outer world seems distant, separate, independent, but it is inseparable from the consciousness through which it is known. Just as a reflection in a mirror cannot exist without the object it reflects, your experience cannot exist without your awareness of it, yet the relationship goes deeper than reflection, because consciousness is not merely observing the world, it is participating in its formation. The patterns you see, the events that unfold, the interactions you have, are all influenced by the state of consciousness you occupy. This does not mean that you control every detail in a conscious, deliberate way, but it does mean that the essence of your experience is shaped from within by the awareness that you are. As this understanding begins to settle within you, it invites a shift in how you relate to life. Instead of looking outward for change, you begin to recognize the source within. Instead of trying to manipulate circumstances directly, you start to explore the state of consciousness from which those circumstances arise. You realize that transformation does not begin with action, but with awareness, with the recognition of what you are being in this moment. And as you become more aware of your inner state, you also become more capable of directing it, choosing it, embodying it intentionally. This is where the deeper power lies, not in forcing the outer world to change, but in aligning your consciousness with the experience you wish to have. Because when consciousness shifts, reality, as you know it, cannot remain the same. Consider for a moment the nature of a dream, not as something distant or abstract, but as something deeply familiar, something you have experienced countless times. In a dream, entire worlds come into being without effort. Landscapes appear, people speak, events unfold with remarkable detail and emotional intensity. While you are within the dream, everything feels real, convincing, unquestionable. You do not stop to ask whether it is true, you simply experience it. And yet, when you awaken, you recognize that the entire dream, every image, every interaction, every sensation, existed within your own awareness. It was not happening outside of you. It was happening within you. Now bring that same inquiry into your waking life. What if this experience, the one you call reality, is operating in a similar way? Not identical in form, but identical in essence, arising within awareness, sustained by it, and perceived through it. Everything you have ever known has appeared within the field of your consciousness. The sky you look at, the ground beneath your feet, the people you interact with, all of it is experienced within awareness. You have never stepped outside of this field to confirm an external world independent of it. Even the idea that something exists beyond your perception is itself a thought appearing within consciousness. This suggests something profound, that life is not something you are moving through, but something that is unfolding within you. Just as a dream does not exist without the dreamer, your experience of the world does not exist without your awareness of it. And yet, because this experience is continuous, stable, and shared in certain ways with others, it creates the impression of solidity, of independence, of something existing out there. But this impression, convincing as it may be, does not change the fundamental nature of experience, which is that it is always known within awareness. Within a dream, you often take on a role, a character with a name, a history, a perspective. You see through its eyes, you feel its emotions, you believe yourself to be that identity for the duration of the dream. And because of this identification, the dream feels personal, meaningful, sometimes even overwhelming. But when you awaken, you realize that you were never truly limited to that character. You were the awareness in which the character appeared. The same possibility exists here and now. The identity you carry, the story you tell yourself about who you are, may feel solid and unchanging, but it too is an experience arising within awareness. It is a role, a perspective, a pattern of thought and feeling that you have come to identify with. And just as in a dream, this identification can be so complete that you forget your deeper nature, the awareness that is observing it all. As you begin to notice this, a subtle shift becomes available. You start to see that your thoughts are not you, but something you are aware of. Your emotions are not you, but experiences moving through awareness. Even your sense of identity, the I you believe yourself to be, can be observed. And if it can be observed, it cannot be the true source of what you are. This realization opens a doorway, not to escape the dream, but to become conscious within it, to recognize that life is unfolding within awareness, and that you are that awareness, not confined to any single role or condition. The dream continues, the world remains, but your relationship to it begins to change. You are no longer completely immersed in the illusion of separation. You begin to sense the unity beneath it, the continuity of consciousness that connects everything you experience. There is a fluidity to this dream, a responsiveness that becomes more apparent as you observe it closely. Just as a dream at night can shift rapidly, changing scenes, altering outcomes, responding to subtle changes in your state, your waking experience also reflects the movements within your awareness. The difference is that the changes here appear more gradual, more structured, giving the impression of fixed reality. But beneath that structure, there is the same principle at work, consciousness expressing itself in form. The events of your life, the patterns that repeat, the opportunities that arise or seem to disappear, all carry the imprint of your inner state. They are not random occurrences, but expressions of the awareness through which they are perceived. And as you begin to recognize this, you start to see life not as something happening to you, but as something unfolding from you. This understanding does not remove you from the experience of life. It deepens it. It invites you to become more present, more attentive, more aware of the subtle interplay between your inner world and your outer experience. You begin to notice how a shift in your perception can alter the meaning of an event, how a change in your feeling can influence the way reality responds. The dream becomes more transparent, not disappearing, but revealing its nature as something alive, dynamic, and intimately connected to your awareness. And in this recognition, there is a quiet sense of freedom, not because the dream has ended, but because you are no longer completely lost within it. There is a quiet activity taking place within you at every moment, so constant, so familiar, that it often goes unnoticed, the movement of thought. Thoughts appear, pass, return, and repeat, forming patterns that begin to feel natural, even inevitable. But what if these thoughts are not merely passing impressions? What if they are the very framework upon which your experience is built? What if every thought you entertain, every idea you accept as true, every assumption you repeatedly dwell upon, is contributing to the structure of the reality you perceive? Just as a dream at night is shaped by the mental activity of the dreamer, your waking life is influenced by the thoughts you consistently hold within awareness. Not every fleeting thought has power, but the ones you return to, the ones you believe, the ones you feel to be true, begin to take on substance, forming the outline of your experience. A thought by itself may seem insignificant, almost weightless. It appears and disappears without effort, leaving little trace. But when a thought is repeated, when it is given attention, when it is felt and accepted, it begins to deepen. It becomes an assumption, a quiet belief about how things are or how they will be. And these assumptions do not remain confined within the mind. They begin to influence perception. You start to notice things that align with them. You interpret events through their lens. You respond in ways that reinforce them. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where your inner world shapes your outer experience, and your outer experience appears to confirm your inner world. This is how the dream takes on the appearance of solidity, not because it is fixed, but because it is consistently shaped by the same patterns of thought. You may have experienced moments where a single idea, held with intensity, begins to alter your entire state of being. A thought of doubt can create hesitation, tension, a sense of limitation. A thought of possibility can open you, expand you, shift your perception of what is available. These changes are not just internal, they influence how you move through the world, how you speak, how you act, how you interpret what unfolds around you. And because your actions and perceptions are shaped by these thoughts, the outcomes you experience begin to reflect them. It may seem as though the world is responding to your actions alone, but beneath those actions lies a deeper cause, the thoughts and assumptions that gave rise to them. In this way, thought is not separate from reality. It is a formative element within it. There is also an imaginative quality to thought, a creative dimension that extends beyond logic or reasoning. You can imagine scenarios that have not yet occurred, feel emotions tied to events that have not yet taken place, construct entire experiences within your mind. And while these imagined scenes may seem unreal, they carry an emotional tone, a sense of reality that the mind responds to. When you dwell in a particular imagined state, feeling it as though it were true, you begin to align your consciousness with that experience. This alignment does not remain internal. It influences your perception, your behavior, your expectations, and over time, it begins to shape the conditions of your life. What you consistently imagine, especially when combined with belief and feeling, becomes a blueprint that the dream follows. Most people do not consciously direct this process. They think in reaction to what they see, rather than recognizing that what they see is influenced by how they think. A circumstance appears, and it generates a thought, which reinforces a feeling, which strengthens a belief, and the cycle continues. In this way, the dream perpetuates itself, repeating patterns that feel unchangeable, simply because the underlying thoughts remain the same. But the moment you become aware of this pattern, the moment you recognize that thought is not just a response, but a cause, you begin to reclaim a certain level of influence. You start to see that by changing the thoughts you dwell upon, you can begin to alter the direction of the dream itself. Not instantly, not always in obvious ways, but gradually, consistently, as new patterns take root. There is a quiet paradox at the heart of human experience, a strange contradiction that goes largely unnoticed. On one hand, there is an immense creative power within, a capacity to shape perception, to influence experience, to move through life with awareness and intention. And yet, on the other hand, so many feel confined, restricted, as though they are bound by forces beyond their control. They look at their circumstances and see limitation. They look at their past and see patterns. They look at the world and feel as though it is something they must endure rather than something they participate in. This sense of being trapped does not arise because there is no freedom, but because the source of that freedom has not yet been recognized. The dream is being lived, but the dreamer is forgotten. From an early age, attention is directed outward. You are taught to observe, to react, to adapt to what is presented before you. The environment becomes the focus, the conditions become the reference point, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the belief forms that reality is something fixed and external. When something desirable appears, it is seen as opportunity. When something unwanted appears, it is seen as obstacle. In both cases, the assumption remains the same, that the cause lies outside. This outward focus creates a dependency, a subtle reliance on circumstances to determine how you feel, what you believe, and what you think is possible. Over time, this dependency deepens until it feels as though your inner state is entirely dictated by the outer world. And in that moment, the sense of being trapped begins to take root. There is also the influence of repetition, the patterns that form through consistent thinking and feeling. When certain thoughts are entertained repeatedly, when certain emotions are experienced again and again, they begin to create a sense of familiarity. This familiarity becomes identity, a quiet definition of who you believe yourself to be. You may begin to see yourself as someone limited, someone struggling, someone defined by past experiences. And because this identity feels stable, it appears unchangeable. Every new experience is filtered through it, interpreted in a way that reinforces it. Even when opportunities for change arise, they may go unnoticed or be dismissed because they do not align with the established pattern. In this way, the mind becomes conditioned, not by force, but by repetition, reinforcing a version of reality that feels inescapable. Another layer to this experience is the identification with thoughts and emotions. When a thought arises, it is often taken as truth, not questioned, not observed, but immediately believed. When an emotion is felt, it is often seen as a reflection of reality, rather than a response shaped by perception. This creates a merging, a blending of awareness with the content of experience. Instead of recognizing thoughts as movements within consciousness, they are taken to define reality itself. Instead of seeing emotions as transient, they are seen as permanent indicators of what is. This identification strengthens the illusion of limitation, because it removes the distance between the observer and the experience. When there is no separation, there is no room to question, no space to choose differently. Time also plays a role in this sense of confinement. The past is often used as evidence, a collection of experiences that seem to prove what is possible and what is not. If something has not happened before, it is assumed to be unlikely. If something has happened repeatedly, it is expected to continue. This creates a projection where the past extends into the future, forming a continuous line that feels fixed and predetermined. The present moment, which holds the potential for change, is overshadowed by this projection. Instead of being seen as a point of creation, it is seen as a continuation of what has already been. And so the cycle repeats, not because it must, but because it is expected to. There is also a subtle fear that maintains this pattern, a hesitation to step beyond what is familiar. Even when the current state feels limiting, it is known, it is predictable. To question it, to consider that reality may be shaped from within, introduces uncertainty. It challenges long-held beliefs. It disrupts the sense of stability that comes from assuming the world is fixed. And so the mind resists, not out of weakness, but out of a desire to maintain coherence. This resistance keeps attention anchored in the known, reinforcing the same patterns of thought and perception that create the feeling of being trapped. It is not that change is impossible, but that it is not fully allowed. As this pattern continues, the outer world begins to appear as confirmation. Circumstances reflect the same limitations, experiences align with the same beliefs, and the illusion strengthens. It begins to feel as though life is happening in a predetermined way, as though there is no real choice, no real influence. But beneath this appearance, the same principle remains at work, consciousness expressing itself through consistent states. The feeling of being trapped is not caused by the world itself, but by the unexamined patterns within consciousness that shape how the world is experienced. And until those patterns are seen, until awareness turns inward, the dream continues to play out in the same way, convincing, consistent, and seemingly unchangeable. There is a subtle yet powerful principle operating beneath every experience you have, a principle so consistent that once you begin to notice it, it reshapes the way you relate to reality itself. It is the understanding that your state of being, your inner atmosphere of thoughts, feelings, and assumptions, is not separate from what you experience, but is the very source from which your experience arises. A state is more than a passing mood. It is a position in consciousness, a way of being that carries with it a certain perspective, a certain set of expectations, a certain interpretation of life. And from this state, everything is perceived, filtered, and expressed. The world you see is not neutral. It is colored by the state you occupy. Change the state, and the entire landscape of your experience begins to shift, not always instantly in form, but immediately in perception and eventually in expression. You may notice that when you are in a particular state, everything seems to align with it. When you feel confident, opportunities appear more visible, interactions feel smoother, possibilities seem within reach. When you feel doubtful, the same world appears restricted, uncertain, filled with obstacles. It is not that the external world has fundamentally changed in that moment, but your relationship to it has. The state you occupy determines what you notice, how you interpret it, and how you respond. And these responses, repeated over time, begin to shape the conditions of your life. In this way, the state is not just influencing your inner experience, it is participating in the creation of your outer reality. What feels like circumstance is often the reflection of a sustained state of consciousness. A state is sustained not by force, but by identification. It is the result of the thoughts you accept, the feelings you dwell in, the beliefs you hold about yourself and the world. When you repeatedly think from a place of limitation, when you feel as though something is missing, when you assume that certain outcomes are out of reach, you enter into a state that reflects those ideas, and from within that state, everything you experience seems to confirm it. This is why change can feel difficult, not because it is inherently hard, but because the state has become familiar. It feels like who you are. To change the state is not simply to think differently for a moment. It is to shift the sense of identity, to move from one way of being into another. And this shift, though subtle, carries immense creative power. There is an art to changing your state, one that does not rely on struggle or force, but on awareness and intentional movement of consciousness. It begins with recognizing the state you are currently in, not judging it, not resisting it, but simply observing it. You notice the patterns of thought, the underlying feelings, the assumptions that define your experience. And in that observation, a space begins to open. You are no longer completely merged with the state. You are aware of it. This awareness introduces the possibility of change, because what is seen can be shifted. From this place, you can begin to gently direct your attention, to imagine, to feel, to assume a different state, not as something distant or future, but as something present, something you are willing to embody now. Imagination plays a central role in this transformation. It allows you to step into a new state before it is visible in your external world. You can imagine yourself as you wish to be, feeling what you would feel, thinking as you would think, experiencing life from that perspective. And as you do this, not as a fleeting exercise, but as a sustained inner experience, the new state begins to take root. It starts to feel natural, familiar, real. This is not pretending, it is shifting consciousness. And as the inner state stabilizes, your perception begins to align with it. You notice different possibilities, you respond in new ways, and gradually the outer world begins to reflect this change. The dream responds, not to force, but to the state from which you are living. There may be moments where the outer world seems unchanged, where the old patterns still appear. In these moments, it becomes important to remain anchored in the new state, not as denial of what is seen, but as recognition that the outer world is a delayed reflection. The state is the cause, the visible world is the effect. To change the effect, you remain faithful to the cause. This requires a certain steadiness, a willingness to persist in the new state even when it is not yet fully expressed externally. But as this persistence continues, the shift becomes inevitable. The old patterns lose their hold, the new state becomes dominant, and the dream reorganizes itself accordingly. As you begin to live from this understanding, life takes on a different quality. You are no longer reacting to circumstances as though they define you. You are recognizing that your state defines how those circumstances appear and unfold. You move with a deeper sense of awareness, choosing the state you occupy rather than falling into it unconsciously. And in doing so, you begin to experience a form of creative participation in life, where change is not something you wait for, but something that begins within you, in the quiet, unseen movement of consciousness from one state to another. There comes a moment, subtle yet profound, when you begin to sense that life is no longer something happening blindly around you, but something you are aware of from within. This shift does not remove you from the world. It refines the way you move through it. The same people remain, the same environments appear, the same structures exist, yet something within you is different. You are no longer completely absorbed in appearances, no longer reacting automatically to every situation. Instead, there is a quiet awareness present, observing, choosing, and guiding your experience from a deeper place. To live consciously within the dream is not to escape it, but to awaken within it, to participate in it with understanding rather than confusion. In this awareness, you begin to notice how easily the mind can drift into old patterns, how quickly it can identify with fear, doubt, or limitation if left unattended. But now, there is a recognition, a gentle interruption of that automatic process. You see the thought arise, you feel the emotion begin, and instead of becoming it, you observe it. This observation creates space, and within that space lies choice. You are no longer compelled to follow every thought to its conclusion, no longer bound to every emotional reaction. You can pause, redirect, and return to the state you wish to embody. This is where conscious living begins, not in controlling every moment, but in being aware enough to choose your response rather than be driven by habit. As this awareness deepens, your relationship with the world begins to change. You stop seeing circumstances as fixed realities and start recognizing them as reflections, expressions of states that can shift. Challenges no longer carry the same weight because they are no longer seen as permanent obstacles, but as temporary formations within the dream. Even uncertainty begins to lose its intensity because you understand that what unfolds is not separate from the state you hold. This does not mean ignoring what is present, but rather seeing through it, recognizing that the visible is not the final authority. There is something deeper at play, something within you that precedes and shapes every experience. Living consciously also brings a heightened sense of presence, a clarity that was previously obscured by constant mental noise. You begin to experience moments more fully, not because they are different, but because you are more aware. The simple act of observing your surroundings, of noticing your thoughts without becoming entangled in them, creates a sense of stillness. And within that stillness, there is a quiet power. It is not forceful, not dramatic, but steady and certain. From this place, your actions become more intentional, your words more deliberate, your choices more aligned with the state you wish to express. Life becomes less about reacting and more about embodying, less about chasing outcomes and more about aligning with the inner cause. There is also a sense of responsibility that arises, not as a burden, but as a natural extension of awareness. When you begin to see that your state influences your experience, that your inner world is not separate from your outer reality, it becomes clear that what you entertain within matters. You are no longer careless with your attention, no longer allowing it to be pulled in every direction without awareness. Instead, you begin to guide it, to place it deliberately on what reflects the state you choose to live in. This does not mean suppressing thoughts or denying emotions, but rather acknowledging them without surrendering to them, choosing consciously what you give life to within your awareness. At times, the old patterns may attempt to reassert themselves, familiar reactions, deeply ingrained assumptions, ways of seeing that once felt natural. But now they are seen for what they are, remnants of unconscious living. And in that recognition, they begin to lose their power. You do not fight them. You simply do not identify with them. You return to awareness, to the state you have chosen, again and again. This repetition is not effortful. It is a quiet persistence, a steady alignment with a deeper understanding of who you are within the dream. Over time, this alignment becomes more stable, more natural, until it begins to define your way of being. As you continue to live from this place, the dream itself begins to feel different, not because it has fundamentally changed in form, but because your experience of it has transformed. There is less resistance, less confusion, less sense of being at the mercy of external conditions. In its place, there is clarity, a quiet confidence, a knowing that you are not separate from what you experience. You move through life with a sense of connection, aware that every moment is unfolding within the same field of consciousness that you are. And within this awareness, there is a freedom, not from the dream itself, but from the illusion of being lost within it. There is a quiet invitation hidden within everything you have explored, not an idea to simply understand, but a shift to be felt, recognized, and lived. It is the realization that what you have taken to be absolute, solid, and final may not be what it appears to be. The world you experience feels real, undeniably so, because you are immersed in it, responding to it, moving through it as though it exists independently of you. But as awareness deepens, something begins to loosen. The certainty that once defined your perception starts to soften, and in its place a question arises, not forced, not intellectual, but natural, almost inevitable. What if this experience, as vivid and convincing as it is not separate from the consciousness through which it is known? The dream feels real, not because it is fixed, but because it is consistently experienced. Every day the same patterns appear, the same structures remain, the same sense of continuity unfolds. This consistency gives reality its weight, its sense of permanence. But consistency does not equal independence. A dream can feel stable while you are in it. Events can follow a sequence. Environments can remain familiar, and yet, upon awakening, you recognize that none of it existed outside your awareness. In the same way, the waking world maintains its form through the continuity of your perception, through the ongoing activity of consciousness. And because this process is uninterrupted, it creates the impression of something existing on its own, something beyond your influence. Yet beneath that impression, the same principle remains, that all experience is known within awareness and cannot be separated from it. Awareness itself is often overlooked, not because it is hidden, but because it is constant. It is the background of every experience, the silent presence in which everything appears. Thoughts arise within it, sensations move through it, perceptions are formed within it, yet it remains unchanged, observing, containing, allowing. You do not see awareness as an object, you do not touch it or hear it, and yet without it, nothing could be seen, touched, or heard. It is the most intimate aspect of your existence, and at the same time the most easily ignored. But when attention gently turns toward it, not to grasp it, but to recognize it, something shifts. You begin to notice that you are not limited to the content of your experience. You are that within which all content appears. As this recognition becomes clearer, the relationship between you and the world begins to transform. You no longer see yourself as a separate entity moving through a fixed environment, but as awareness in which the entire experience is unfolding. This does not remove the appearance of the world, it does not dissolve the forms or the interactions, but it changes how they are perceived. The sense of distance begins to fade. The boundary between observer and observed becomes less rigid. You start to feel a continuity, a connection, not as a concept, but as a direct experience. And within this experience, there is a quiet stability, something that is not affected by the changing conditions of the world, something that remains present regardless of what appears. There is also a subtle release that begins to occur, a letting go of the need to control every outcome, to resist every unwanted condition, to cling to every desired result. This does not come from indifference, but from understanding. When you recognize that the outer world is not separate from your state of consciousness, the focus naturally shifts inward. Instead of trying to rearrange appearances, you begin to explore the source from which those appearances arise. This shift reduces the tension that comes from trying to force change externally and replaces it with a quieter, more direct approach, one that begins within awareness itself. The need to struggle diminishes, not because challenges disappear, but because they are no longer seen as ultimate. And yet, even with this understanding, the dream continues. Life unfolds, moments pass, experiences come and go. The difference now is not in what happens, but in how it is known. There is a growing sense that everything you encounter, every situation, every interaction, every thought, is part of a larger movement within consciousness. Nothing stands alone. Nothing exists in isolation. It is all connected, not by visible threads, but by the awareness in which it appears. This recognition does not require constant effort. It deepens naturally, quietly, as you continue to observe, to notice, to remain present with what is. And as it deepens, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, not abruptly, but gradually, revealing a more unified experience of reality. In this unfolding awareness, there is no need to arrive at a final conclusion, no need to define everything with certainty. The process itself is the insight, the continuous recognition that what you experience is not separate from what you are. Each moment becomes an opportunity to see more clearly, to feel more deeply, to remain aware of the presence within which it all unfolds. And as this awareness stabilizes, the dream no longer holds the same unconscious grip. It is still vivid, still detailed, still meaningful, but it is no longer absolute. There is space within it now, space for awareness, space for choice, space for a deeper understanding to emerge naturally, without force, without resistance, simply through seeing what has always been there.